My guest this week is a filmmaker whose documentary, The Red Pill, explores her eye-opening journey into the men's rights movement, which is out in select theaters right now. Cassie Jaye, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Hello, glad to be here.
I've had a lot of people that have wanted to make this happen, this sit down. I suspect that no matter what we say over the next hour, a certain amount of people are going to love it no matter what, and a certain amount of people are going to hate it no matter what. Is that just part of talking about men's rights and feminism? Does that just come with the territory, do you think?
Yes, definitely. I mean, men's rights especially. Just talking about men's issues gets a lot of feathers ruffled, and that's partly why I wanted to make the film.
Yeah, so let's talk about you a little bit and your journey before we get into the film specifically. So tell me a little about yourself. Were you always interested in men's rights? When was I know your evolution is partly what happened during the course of the film, but just tell me a little bit about growing up and that kind of thing.
Okay, well, I'm 30 right now. I started making films when I was 21 years old, directing documentaries, and I've always been interested in gender issues and sexuality. So my first film was about sex education in America, and it was called Daddy, I Do. And that feature documentary really focused on women's rights and women's issues, reproductive rights and single motherhood. And my second feature film was about gay marriage called The Right to Love, An American Family. And that was released in 2012 and had great response and positive reactions. And then in 2013, I was done screening The Right to Love, and I was looking for my next topic. And I was toying around with a couple different film ideas. One was about the legalization of prostitution issue or decriminalization. And I was also looking at rape culture as being a possible topic for my next film. And this was long before The Hunting Ground came around. And while I was researching rape culture, I came across the online men's rights movement. And for about 10 years previously, I'd been a staunch feminist. I'd been interested in gender issues and sexuality. And I thought, well, what is this hidden corner of the online communities, and is this the group of misogynists I've been hearing about that are perpetuating rape culture? And so I embarked on this journey to make a film about the men's rights movement, but from my feminist perspective.
Yeah. What did your feminist perspective, how would you summarize your version of feminism, at least before you started this journey?
Yeah. Well, I started calling myself a feminist when I was around 18 or 19 years old, around 2004, 2005. And at the time, I was living in Los Angeles, and when I started telling my friends that I was a feminist, a lot of people were saying, "What? You're a woman hater? You're not a lesbian. You don't have hairy armpits." And so I had that, that kind of, back then it was still that old mentality of thinking that feminists were these butch lesbians kind of thing. And the reason I became a feminist was because at the time I was acting in Los Angeles. I moved to LA when I was 18 and started acting in a bunch of independent films. And I was very green and naive at the time, and so I had a lot of instances where film producers would make advances on me, and I felt like, so is this my role in the world, is just being this sexual object to be, rather than being uplifted for my talents or my intelligence. And then a lot of the roles that I was going out for in acting were the hot blonde chick that dies in the first 10 minutes. And so I was just fed up with, this kind of stereotypical role I was playing in films, and also it seems like in life. And so
that's interesting. Let's pause there for a sec. So somehow liberal Hollywood is what pushed you into feminism by its actual judgment of women. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of girls in LA also feel objectified for being a woman, and now with making The Red Pill, I have different views on that. But yeah, and also in the film industry, it is the statistics on how many women are directors or producers or writers is, there's a big gap between men and women in those positions. So definitely liberal Hollywood, I think, has just thinks a lot about women's rights and women's issues, and I got wrapped up into that culture. And also at the time, I should mention, I started because 2004, 2005, that was just when it was going, or at least I was going from MySpace to Facebook, and then later on Twitter came around, and Tumblr. And so I think during this social media evolution, feminism and what it was marketing as being a feminist, being the movement for gender equality, was kind of this easy pitch. It's like, of course, everyone should be for gender equality. And
Right.
so when originally people were saying, how are you a feminist? You're not a man-hater kind of thing. And I was telling my friends that I was a feminist. Now, fast forward to 2013, when I started looking at the men's rights movement, all my friends who were confused of why I was a feminist now were more feminist than I was. And so I've definitely seen this shift in people's acceptance of feminism and
Right.
accepting the label.
So you were a card-carrying feminist, so to speak. You find out about this men's rights movement, which was largely just an online, like what was it that you first found out? Was this, these on message boards or on, where were these people when this thing started? Now it's a little more, it's gained a little more traction. I think it's out there a little bit more, but where was it at the time?
Yeah, so at the time it was March 2013. And like I said, I was researching rape culture, and then I stumbled across a website called avoiceformen.com. And whenever the men's rights movement is talked about in mainstream media, the few times it is talked about, they usually address A Voice for Men and their misogynistic rantings and this community of men who hate women and share their hatred with each other, and then all get riled up together in this online community of A Voice for Men.
Right.
So that was the website that I initially found, and they definitely have some crude language, a lot of swearing in there, and a lot of talking points that I never heard of before. So from my feminist perspective, my walls were up, and I was immediately thinking, these are the misogynists I've been hearing about. And it terrified me, and it took a couple months of me looking at some other documentary topics to explore, and I just kept on coming back to the idea of the men's rights movement because I thought it was this secret underground world that no one's ever explored, and especially at that time, not many people heard of the men's rights movement, so it really interested me.
So your intentions when you started were to look at this thing, and you saw the language they were using and some of the over the top stuff, and your intentions was sort of to expose it through a documentary, but your feelings slowly changed the more that you got into it, right?
Yes, yeah. So when I initially started, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to get great footage on camera of these guys, ranting about women, or
Right.
maybe even threatening me as I'm interviewing them. And I did feel like my protection while I was going to interview men's rights activists was the camera. As long as we're rolling, I'm okay with getting hurt. And then, and also having my crew there, I did feel protected. But at the same time, I'd been hearing that these men hate women, that they harass women, that they dox women. So that's what I was expecting going into interviewing them, that I was going to see, capture this amazing footage of this.
Yeah. Was it hard to find people to interview? Because I know the online, especially in something like a topic like this, the online world versus the actual world sometimes have very little connection with each other.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the online world is, you might as well be Oz behind the curtain. I mean, it's a very, anonymity. Oh my gosh, I can't even say that word right.
They're anonymous. How about that? Yeah.
Yeah, anonymity
Yeah.
is comforting, and people can act like whoever they want to behind a computer. And with the online men's rights movement, I think, from what I've seen, reading all the comments and the articles that they write, there is a lot of truth to what they're saying, although they do take a less PC approach, and so that's what they're attacked for from mainstream media.
So what was like the first issue that you saw them talking about that you thought, oh, there might be some legitimacy here?
Oh gosh, well, so for context, I filmed MRAs and Feminist for a full year, and I interviewed 44 people, and each interview was different from the next. Personality types, some jive very well, and others I just couldn't quite connect with. But each interview I had, we went over all the issues, and my understanding of each issue evolved over that amount of time, and also watching the footage back while I was editing the film. But domestic violence was a big one that really got me thinking. Just the amount of support financial support, emotional support, cultural support for female victims of domestic violence versus men is staggering. And then one big turning point for me on my journey was actually putting the magnifying glass on my own feminist beliefs and realizing that I was unwilling to have compassion for a male victim of domestic violence, because I did interview some male victims. But if it was a woman speaking and she was saying the exact same thing that this male victim was saying, then I would have had instant compassion without question, or not blaming her for the choices she made. Whereas with these male victims, I found myself saying, well, why did you get into this relationship with a woman who obviously had a lot of red flags going into it, and why didn't you leave? And
yeah, well, how much of that is just male and woman stuff that's just hardwired into us? Like the idea that the man is supposed to be powerful and the woman isn't. Now you have a man that's being abused, and as you're saying, it was sort of like built into you to have less compassion for them. It's kind of tough to untie that, right?
Yeah, and so often within feminism, we talk about double standards, that if you call a guy a player or cool if he dates a lot of girls, and then a girl a slut. And so within feminism, we constantly talk about double standards, but then I ended up seeing all these double standards within myself when addressing men's issues. And so as I was interviewing the MRAs, men's rights activists, I kept on trying to find ways to diminish their issues. And I was first doing that myself, and also in my video diaries, which are included in the film. But then once I got past the point of making excuses for these issues and really...
Was there a breaking point? I mean, was there really a moment where you were like, I need to change my own outlook here?
Well, I think part of what gave me that breaking point was when I started to explain to my feminist friends men's issues that I really did think they had the statistics to back them in the studies, and to support what the MRAs are saying. And so then I would try to relay that message to my feminist friends, and then I saw their unwillingness to listen and just be dismissive towards these issues. And I realized I was doing that too, but I did have a breaking point where I started to think, no, we should, for instance, let's use an example. With suicide. 78% of all suicides around the world are men. And the common reaction you'll get from feminists is saying that more women attempt suicide. And what I learned from the men's rights movement is they aren't trying to dismiss women's issues, or they're not saying that no woman is ever raped or no woman is ever abused by her spouse, but they're trying to bring up issues that men face. But when you do that, instantly feminists, or even people who don't wear feminism on their sleeve, but just are the kind of mainstream liberal, seemingly open-minded person.
Seemingly open-minded, yeah. That seems to be a theme around a lot of the stuff I talk about, yeah.
Seemingly. And so they'll have these quick responses that are, in essence, diminishing what the men's issue is, like saying, well, more women attempt, but still 78% of all suicides are men. And then domestic violence, 1 in 3 women are, within their lifetime, will be a victim of physical abuse by an intimate partner, and 1 in 4 men. And that's from the CDC, and it's very similar. We always hear about the 1 in 3 women when talking about domestic violence, but we rarely hear about men. So, so when an MRA tries to bring up 1 in 4 men, immediately feminists are saying, yeah, but more women. Okay, but we talk about that, and why are we so unwilling to address men's issues?
What does that tell us, do you think, about just our need to, I always talk about the oppression Olympics here, that everyone wants to be more aggrieved than someone else so that it seems like their problems are worse, and then by being more aggrieved, they're somehow better than? Because it sounds like that was a bit of the response you were getting from the feminists. You weren't suddenly denying any of the problems that the feminists had, right?
Yeah.
But you were saying, here's some other problems, but for them to acknowledge that would somehow diminish their own problems somehow, I suppose, in their mind. And that's kind of crazy way to have a whole conversation.
Yeah, and it does turn into the tit for tat oppression Olympics, who has it worse. And that's what I found really fascinating about making the red pill is because MRAs aren't dismissing women's issues, and all the MRAs I spoke to said that they are for women's rights. That's a big misconception that the mainstream media tries to paint about the men's rights movement, that they're trying to turn back the clock on women's rights, want them back in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant, and that's not the case at all. And I would actually say they're even going further into the gender equality discussion by adding men to the discussion. And but what was so fascinating about just the feminist ideology, and that was a word that I didn't connect with feminism many months into filming it, and when it finally clicked in my head that feminism is an ideology. And I would love for our culture to get to a point where we can distinguish between feminism and being for women's rights, because they are two different things. Feminism is a movement with a belief system, and not all people who say they are feminists, or not all people who are non-feminists, are against women's rights. You can be for women's rights without being a feminist.
Right. So do you think that the ideology of feminism, or the movement of feminism, kind of lost its way over the years? Do you think it's possible? I've had a few guests on here that have said, as things have gotten better for women, and as there is equality for women, you always have to find a new oppression for yourself, according to the suppression Olympic scale. So you have to suddenly be more offended by words if actions aren't happening to you, and things like that. So do you think the movement kind of just lost its way?
I mean, I'll try to think back to my previous 10 years of being a feminist and how I saw it evolve. And I don't think, when I became a feminist around 2005, it wasn't as big as it is now. And I think social media has a large part to do with that. And it's almost gotten to the point where, this is my personal opinion, I don't think everyone would agree with this, but it almost becomes where people want to bully you into labeling yourself a feminist. And I've heard some feminist women tell men, say, well, are you for gender equality? Well, yes, I am. Well, then you're a feminist. And it's almost like a very, if that's the only test you have to take, that
Right.
Are you for gender equality? Yes. And here's your score, you're a feminist.
Right.
It's so much deeper than that. And it is the politics of the movement, it's the tactics, it's the ideology that all women are oppressed by all men, that we live in a patriarchy, and that's discounting all the other factors, including gender roles, that large part of them are biologically related.
Yeah. Talk to me about the biologically related gender roles,
Yeah.
because there is something to that. Men evolved to be the hunters and women were the gatherers. There is something there. That doesn't mean that obviously women can have virtually any job that a man can have and all that stuff. But there are some things that have just, we've evolved to be different, right? And that's okay?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, how you bear children is the biggest difference. And because women do carry the child and also breastfeed, that does change how relationships, the dynamics of the home and how you operate the home and raise the kids up, that does change who's decided to be the breadwinner, and if someone's going to stay home, who is going to be that person. And feminism has tried to rewrite the script that the reason men go to work and women stay home is because we have this idea of the gender wage gap, so therefore why should she be the breadwinner if she's going to make 77 cents to a man's dollar? That doesn't make sense. So it's keeping her in the home because of this gender discrimination. But as I'm sure you know, the gender wage gap is not based.
I've had Christina Hoff-Sommers on.
Right.
We've dived into it, yeah.
Right.
So how would you actually define feminism then? I probably should have asked you this 10 minutes ago, but what do you think what would your definition of 2016, what does feminism mean?
Oh gosh, that's a
I'm
tough
really
one.
putting you on the spot
Yeah,
here.
how would I define feminism now with where my head is after making the red pill? I do believe it is an ideology. I actually came out of a religion when I was in my teen years, and spoiler alert, with the red pill, I also end up not being a feminist after making the red pill, and they were very similar experiences for me. I call it the shedding process, where it happens over a long period of years for me, but it's this resistance to wanting to hear the facts and apply that to your belief system that's been so comfortable for so long and that you've kind of blindly believed in and led you throughout your life. And when you start questioning that, it's a very scary experience. So, but But as far as how I define feminism now, I do think of it as a quasi-religion because the feminists that I've been seeing are unwilling to have an intellectual discussion just based on the statistics and facts that don't fit within their belief system. And so if you believe that all women are oppressed by all men, then how could it be that women have more reproductive rights and more reproductive choices when having children, and yet men could be a victim of paternity fraud? And paternity fraud is when you're raising a child that you later find out is not yours, and there's no repercussion for a woman if she'd been lying to this man for 18 years saying it's his own kid, and turns out it's not, and the courts don't support him being any kind of resolution to that. I mean, there's so many different issues that do attack men on their gender.
And some of those things actually are systemic. Like when people talk about systemic racism, there are things that are systemic. I have a friend right now that's going through a divorce with a child custody battle, and he's been the primary breadwinner for the entire time, and at times his wife didn't work and didn't have a lot of money, and he provided for everybody, but she's getting much more leniency related to the child right now. That's actually systemic, meaning that it's part of the system, the legal system, that she's getting benefits that he doesn't as the man.
Yes. Yeah, and something when I was making the red pill that was very interesting is that feminists will also acknowledge custody issues for men, but they will still say that it's discrimination against women. So the reason that women get custody of the children about 80% of the time in all custody cases is because it's discrimination against women, that women are expected to be the child caretaker and be the stay-at-home mom.
So even if they get the child, which in most cases is what they want, that's still discrimination.
Yes.
Because that's the role that the woman is supposed to play or something.
Yeah, I just recently saw a video online about maternity leave versus paternity leave, and it was something around the world. The average for maternity leave days, paid maternity leave days, was 107 days around the world, and for men it was something like 7 days. And so they said that statistic, and then immediately after they said, this is discrimination against women that we're expected to take care of the kids. Although the whole video was talking about how the US needed maternity leave and paternity leave.
Yeah.
But
Do you see some of this stuff changing in a positive way? I have a friend who works at Facebook who his wife had a kid, and they basically like forced him to take paternity leave. Like she was okay handling it, and she has a good family that was around helping her with the kid, but they basically were like saying to my friend, no, you take it too. And he did, and he ended up working from home a lot and whatever, but so some of this stuff is sort of evening out in some ways, right?
Yeah, and something
you don't have to agree with me, by the way.
Well, I'm going to steal a quote from Janice Fee Mango, who's a professor at Ottawa University. She says that we need to strive towards equal opportunity, not equal outcome. And I think that applies with maternity and paternity leave, that we should have equal opportunity for both parents. But we shouldn't force, okay, what's a good example? We shouldn't force girls to get into STEM education so it equals to 50%, or we shouldn't force that we have half female senators or CEOs and all that. We shouldn't force any of that. And I think a lot of what MRAs and dissident feminists talk about is that women do have choices, actually more choices than men do, as far as if you want to stay at home with the kids or be a breadwinner. And women are using that choice, and so far it hasn't evened things out. We don't have half the amount of senators being women.
Right.
So,
and artificial quotas would just be artificial. It wouldn't necessarily mean that that's exactly what women want to do or what men want to do. It would just be, it seems like it's fair, it makes people kind of feel good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or true.
Something that's interesting is that Michael Moore, who's another documentarian, who's, I really do admire his work, but he has a film festival in Flint, Michigan, and his last film festival, he only accepted female-directed films. And he said that he wanted to do that until things become even with female-directed films with men. And
how did that make you feel in your line of work?
Well, I do wonder if he told everyone that before they submitted their film, because if all these guys are submitting their films and they had no chance of making it into the film festival, that'd be a little...
Right.
But yeah, I think it's very interesting that there is this big push to help female filmmakers, although you have to be on script. Because here I am, a female filmmaker, and I have not gotten the support that I've gotten from my other films, because this is not, the red pill is not in line with the feminist agenda, you know?
Right. So doing a film about feminism, you're going to get a certain amount of mainstream support. Doing a film about gay rights, you're going to get a certain amount of mainstream support. This is the one where, as you said, you're ruffling some feathers, so the mainstream support isn't as easy, so to speak.
And I would add to that the amount of backlash that I've seen from making this film, it's been 3.5 years now in the making, and we just released it last week. And because I haven't been seeing that support of me making this film, I've started to realize that maybe feminism is just, it's not about, feminism isn't for women, it's for feminism. Because if it were just about women and helping women, then I would have seen more support. Right.
So.
And interestingly enough, some of the most vocal people disagreeing with my film or trying to actually wage a smear campaign against me are one major, what I would call a feminist troll blogger, David Fertrell. He's a male feminist.
Yeah.
And so it's just fascinating that, you know, and there's so many people, feminists, who support his attacks on me, and it's just interesting gender reversal.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I want to back up to something that you said about the men's rights in the first place, that you didn't find there to be that many misogynists or guys that really hated women or things like that. You're not saying that there are none, right? Like there obviously are some. You're acknowledging that, right? Like
I haven't met them.
Really? So
Yeah.
even when you were in the message boards and things, I haven't really dived in that much to that kind of stuff, but really there wasn't like just some level of guys that are just angry, maybe angry at the world, and they're misdirecting it on women or something else. You really didn't find much of that.
Definitely troll commenters, but there is policing happening on A Voice for Men and the other men's rights websites, and many people would call them out or block them from the site. And here's a great example of what the mainstream media will do with when reporting on the men's rights movement. Is Paul Elam, who's the founder of A Voice for Men. There was someone who wrote a horrible comment on A Voice for Men, and this was about 2 years ago. And this was early on when they were just really starting to grow, and I was filming them. So Paul Elam took this long, horrible comment that was bashing women and promoting violence against women, and he copied and pasted it into his article and said, this is absolutely unacceptable. If I see any of this activity, you're going to be blocked from the site and no questions asked. So it was just one article that he wrote and copy and pasted. And then feminist media took the comment that he quoted and said, look at what MRAs and A Voice for Men says about women. And that was so common with all the articles I was finding on Voice for Men. They do a lot of satire, and a lot of the headlines are clickbait to get you to think, what's that? And so for instance, the headline would be, when is it okay to punch your wife? But then you read within it, and they are trying to make a point, all that, you know, with...
Right. So their tactics may be not the best. Questionable.
Yeah.
But the content, you're saying, in an article like that, so in an article like that, when is it okay to hit your wife? I would basically argue never. I guess if she hit you, you could hit her back. But what in that type of article, like what are they going for?
Well, his point is that there is this double standard that you're not allowed to defend yourself if you're a boy or a man, and women can hit men, but you can't hit back, and that's what the article talks about. And here's a good example of my step-nephew, who's 15 years old, who lives in Seattle. Just this past spring, at an assembly at his school, all of the boys had to get off the bleachers, go to the front of the stage, and take a pledge that they would never hit a girl. And this is just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And so this double standard that boys can never hit girls, but girls, you know, free reign, they're weak anyways.
In a weird way, it empowers girls to hit boys probably at that school because they know they're not going to be hit back.
Yeah.
That's a little weird. Did you see this video maybe about 2 years ago on the New York City subway where this woman was really berating this guy? They didn't even know each other. They're just on the subway, some other random person videotaping, and she's screaming at him. Finally, she hits him, And he really was doing next to nothing. And then he did hit her back, basically knocked her out. This was a big guy. And I did a video on it, and I basically said, and I've evolved a little bit with all this stuff too, but I basically was like, don't hit her. He shouldn't have hit her, he shouldn't have hit her. And I got a ton of shit for that. And in retrospect, I guess what I meant really was, she hit you, she shouldn't have done it, but you're a big guy, nothing good is gonna come out of this, I guess. In a situation like that, what do you think? Even because when there are obvious strength differences also. Now, of course, the strength difference could be the other way. You could have a very meager guy and a bodybuilding woman. I mean, all kinds of things. So I'm not even sure what my question is with that. But when you see instances like that where the power dynamic doesn't quite make sense for what we think of for these things.
He's trapped. He's trapped. There's no easy answer. People shouldn't hit other people. That's the end of it. But the system allows for women to hit men without repercussions, really, and men cannot hit women, or you're going to jail. And even just the accusation that a man hit a woman, or so many times I heard from MRAs that there would be some kind of domestic violence situation in a home where a woman is going at a guy with a knife, he grabs her arms to hold her back, he leaves a couple bruises, and he's the one spending the night in jail and going to court. And I have heard of so many of these cases of women attacking men, and the strength issue, that something else that needs to be brought into the discussion is that women use weapons more often. And so there is an equalizer. But it's hard, for that guy on the bus, there's no easy answer, and because of the culture we live in, he's going to be the one attacked that he shouldn't have done that, and
right.
And then
at the end, I guess my point was just, it sucks. Like, she was abusing him verbally, she shouldn't have hit him, but it was like nothing good was going to come out of it. And yet at the same time, it's like, she hit you, like, you can hit her back. It just feels weird, I suppose. But that sort of is how the world works. Yeah,
and I didn't include this in my film because I couldn't find enough evidence to prove this, but one of the stories that I heard while I was interviewing MRAs is that Rihanna with her, is it James Brown? The ex?
Chris Brown.
Chris Brown.
Yeah. Not James Brown. That's different guy, different era. Okay. Unless you know something about it.
Previous life.
Yeah.
So apparently when it was first reported, and this is just what an MRA told me, I tried to find evidence of this, and I did find some articles supporting what this MRA said, but that when it was first reported, she was wailing on him as he was driving, and she was attacking him, he was swerving, and then he took one punch, knocked her out, and then that was the infamous case of her being beaten up. And so I don't have enough evidence to say that's exactly true, but if it were, I think that should be talked about, that what if it wasn't just him slugging her out of nowhere? What if she was wailing on him while he was driving, he was swerving all over the place, they were going to get into a crash? And so whose fault is it? But the women's movement and the feminist movement really lifted up Rihanna as this example of a female victim of domestic violence. And one of the MRAs that I interviewed.
But then she went back to him also, right?
Yes.
And then they did a video together and everything that was sort of about it. And then a lot of feminists, I guess, were against her or were angry at her for going back, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing with domestic violence, is there, so many times you want to tell the person who's saying they're a victim or is actually a victim that they need to make better choices, get out of that situation. But there's a lot more going on behind the domestic violence issue than just men abusing women and nothing else, no gray area. There's a lot of gray area.